I'm really lucky to have had that experience, that I know that, a bunch of surfers with no campaign experience at all and no knowledge of anything can make a big difference. And if we can, then just think what everybody can do. And that's my kind of key message, I think, is believe you can.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess. Welcome to the show. Thanks for listening. It means a lot that you're tuning in wherever you are. And I do know that actually, from my statistical breakdown, that there are listeners all over this wonderful globe, all over this Spaceship Earth, beautiful planet flying through the universe. So great it's fantastic that you're listening and means a lot, and hope you're enjoying the output. This is episode 16. It's taken a little of a while to have a little bit of a pause in the flow of the output of the Spaceship Earth, and this is a little reflection of what it is to be a podcaster, to be a solo podcaster. No sponsors, no production teams. It's just me, which means, sometimes the podcast output gets a bit stuck. But that's all right. That's life, right? This is the world, actually, that I feel more comfortable with, which is, things aren't always on time. It's not always an efficient machine. There's a sort of messiness to life, which is actually quite beautiful. Sometimes the things are just emerging and unfolding and flowing, and then other times there's kind of meltdown and chaos, and things get stuck, and but that's just what it is to be human, I think, maybe. So what that means is I have a bit of a backlog sometimes. Right at the moment, I've recorded a few episodes, but then I've got to upload them and, do a little bit of top and tailing, and then, put the covers on and the show notes, and then stick them out there into the world, into the universe, for you, the wonderful listener, to listen to, to listen to, and hopefully to inspire or provoke or give you some other little bits of knowledge, or help you question things, or who knows what they do. Actually, I have no idea. I do get a few emails, which is nice. People say, keep them coming. So that's what I'm trying to do. But anyway, back to the one-man show. There is a little bit of a backlog. So I've got a few episodes I've got to try and push through now. And this one is episode 16, and this is with a wonderful man called Chris Hines. Now, if you are a surfer, or even if you're a sort of, an ocean activist, you will probably know of Chris Hines. Chris Hines was one of the original co-founders of the Enviro surf charity Surfers Against Sewage. Now, he started with another crew, Surfers Against Sewage, nearly 30 years ago. I think it's next year, it's 30 years. Now, if you know Surfers Against Sewage today, you'll know they're under the amazing leadership of Hugo Tagholm, and they're doing extraordinary things. And you might know a lot of their work today around the ocean plastic crisis, and actually increasingly our plastic consumption crisis, basically, in land, and doing all kinds of amazing work there. And I'll link through to that in the show notes if you're not aware. But the Surfers Against Sewage actually started, as their name suggests, because there was literally shit flowing into the sea from all areas, and so I caught up with Chris by chance in Ireland last month, and had an opportunity to have a conversation with him about how what happened nearly 30 years ago. How did this Surfers Against Sewage start? And what I love about this conversation with Chris is that basically Chris is a very inspirational character, but what you get from Chris is that, if something's really bothering you, do something about it. And this is a great story of believing that you can change stuff, even if you've really got absolutely no idea what you're doing, but you're determined to do it. So I'm going to cut it short then, just kick into the interview. And actually, this is part of my thing at the moment with these podcasts, is to keep them coming, to keep the time, to keep them coming out, to keep the recording, to keep the conversations going. I'm going to try and just make these top and tails pretty short, straight in, straight out, and hopefully the conversations themselves will do the work. So thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy this one. This is Chris Hines. Well, Chris, welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
Brilliant.
Thanks for finding the time for this.
Yeah, pleasure.
I'm super curious about... you were a co-founder of environmental surf charity Surfers Against Sewage. And
yes.
That was 1990, right?
Yep.
And I wondered if we could start there, because I was raving a lot in 1990, but I would love to know what was going on with you. How did this whole thing happen? Like, can you give us... Because a lot of my listeners, some of them will know about Surfers Against Sewage today, but many of them actually probably may not know at all. And I'm just really curious, because it's 30 years next year, right? So
yeah.
I'd love to just know a bit about your story, what was happening at that time, where were you, how did this thing start?
Okay, so I guess so. I was born in '62. If you were raving, I was loving punk and reggae when I was 15, 16, 17. I moved to Cornwall. I grew up in Devon. I moved to Cornwall when I was 19, working for a surfing magazine. I lived in a van for 6
So you were
months.
surfing from
age 11. 11 or 12. I had my first hard surfboard. A wooden belly board before that. But then I got a job with the first UK surfing magazine to get national distribution through Smiths and John Menzies and things. So that meant I could move to Cornwall.
Which was
and
what? What was that mag? That was...
God, that was a magazine called Surf Scene. Now gone to it doesn't exist anymore. But it was the first one to get that national distribution, and surfing at that time was kind of tiny compared with what it is now. And we had a circulation of a few thousand, and then that took it to 14,000, and then advertising could get involved, etc.
Yeah.
So I got this job paying me 40 quid a week, and that wasn't enough to have a van, to vehicle and somewhere to live. So I lived in a van for the first 6 months.
Yeah.
Learnt a little bit of a trade, and then basically spent the next few years just living the dream, going surfing as much as I could, trips down to Morocco, Australia, through Indonesia and things. And then I came back in about 88, 89, and a bunch of us in the kind of couple of villages, Porthtowan and St Agnes, and some of us living in a place called Mount Hawke, which is just a mile inland. We were aware of all this pollution, and ironic, even today, it was with all the plastics campaigning, it was the panty liners and the condoms that were really making it very visual. And before the panty liner, the sewage was in the sea, but it wasn't evident. So a guy called Andrew Kingsley Tubbs, Ange is what he's known as, he coined the phrase SAS, Surfers Against Sewage, playing on that military thing. He'd always had a little bit of a fixation with wearing gas masks. I think the first time I ever met him, he was in a gas mask at a fancy dress party. And there was this little kind of kick of a few of us were saying, well, we could print a few T-shirts, spray a bit of graffiti, but then others were saying, well, what would we achieve? So there was this little call. If you were serious about this, I was one of the ones. I said, well, that will cause a little bit of a stir, but it won't achieve anything, and what's the point in that? So we called a meeting at Minzie's house. Minzie's one of the local surfers, and we went around to his mum's house, and about 10 of us turned up. 4 of us put 10 quid on the table. We called a public meeting 2 weeks later, and did a little press release about that. And 200 people turned up. You couldn't get into the village hall. There were people leaning in through the windows. We charged £2 membership. We were that naive that we thought we may be able to save up and buy a sewage treatment works. But they were several million, we found out shortly after that. So that wasn't going anywhere. But
so it was really evident. So the sewage problem at the time, and obviously the surf community was obviously a lot
it was
smaller.
tiny.
Yeah,
tiny. And we were surfing in shit.
Yeah, and that was it almost like part of the deal? When did you start feeling like this is ridiculous? Or
it was that kind of year. The year before that, we were going, this is just a joke, and we started to ask around. We kind of went, well, what's happening? And the National Rivers Authority, who then became the Environment Agency, said, well, nothing. And the water company, the privatisation of the water industry was just happening. And there was this absolute clangor where Maggie Thatcher said, she was Prime Minister at the time, and she stated on BBC Nature that all sewage is treated before discharge. And that was a downright lie. There were 400 million gallons of crude sewage being discharged every single day around Britain's coastline when she said that, from Brighton to Bournemouth, Newquay to Newcastle. Every single coastal village, town, city, literally what you flushed down the toilet and went out of your washing machines, etc., all just went straight into the sea, most of it without even a basic sieve screen in place. So we were surfing in a slick of human shit.
Right.
We were... Porth Tower, which then became known as Porth Tampon.
Right, yeah.
And I managed to get that into Hansard. So it's there in the House of Parliament Select Committee. It was obscene. It was, literally, if low tide was 12 o'clock lunchtime, then everybody this would be all of Camborne, Poole and Redruth, the biggest conurbation in Cornwall, would all go to the loo in the morning. That would all drain out of the outfall pipe. 2 outfall pipes, 2.5 million gallons of crude each, and then with an incoming tide that would just push up the coast into Porth Town, and that would be what we would surf in. And we would get ill.
Yeah,
gross aesthetic pollution, panty liners blowing up the street outside the village shop, and we just went, "This is crazy. We'll do something." Yeah, enough.
So you called this meet.
Yeah.
And you had this idea of like, what is that? You sort of saw it as a at that point. What was your thinking about where this could go, or was it just more an experiment?
I don't think there wasn't particularly much thinking. I think really, which makes it amazing where it is today. Yeah. We just wanted to try and make a difference. We wanted to try and get initially our own 2-3 beaches cleaned up. St Agnes was pretty foul as well. St Agnes had a little short outfall right next to the beach there. And we just wanted to initially to do that. But the moment we put our kind of heads above the pulpit or put our hands up in the air and said, we've got this problem, everybody else started contacting us. And through that summer, one of the first things we did was we went and bought shares in South West Water. That allowed us to go to their annual general meeting. Uh-huh. We started getting media coverage. Brilliant guy. So there was a guy called Howard Judd. Howard, rest in peace, he died a couple of years ago. But he took the first photos of a guy called Justin Ward, another one of the local crews started it. And Justin was surfing in a gas mask, and then the Daily Mirror picked up on that, printed a whole page picture of Justin, and we were kind of off. By that September, October, we had a Channel 4 documentary following us. They did an hour-long documentary.
What were they exploring at that? What was the angle that they were interested in? Was it the just the sort of this grassroots action?
Yeah,
was it
was
big business, or what was
it? Was a bunch. It was basically this tiny bunch of people being activists.
Yeah,
and obviously, at that time, surfing was so small. Nobody really cared about the surfing. But I've often said, surfing's used to sell everything. From washing powder to cars, it's the ad man's dream. And in a way, what we did was to go, okay, well, maybe we'll use surfing to sell the issue of clean seas, because that imagery allowed us to get hold of that. And people, Capital FM, when we first went to the Houses of Parliament, Capital FM could play a Beach Boys track,
right,
and then lead into us as a story, and that allowed people to communicate about it. What did we think we'd achieve? Well, that first summer we raised through membership and sale of T-shirts and sweatshirts, and then we had a fundraising ball. Glenn Tilbrook from The Squeeze, he played our first ball. So we got this wonderful guy called Graham Jones, lives in the village. Graham used to be the guitarist for Haircut 100. And Graham said, I'll try and get someone. And, 500 of us in a marquee on the cliffs, with Glenn Tilbrook playing, and we raised some money. And at the end of that summer, there was enough money to pay me for 6 weeks. I wasn't doing anything. I'd quit my job and was doing surfing lessons. And they said, you can work until the money runs out. And there's 6 weeks, and that 6 weeks became 10 years.
Wow. And this was as well. It's just put in the context. This is sort of pre-internet, right?
Yeah. So off we went, and through that kind of summer, through the end of that summer into the autumn, and then we kind of went to Wales, and whoa, they had problems. If we thought we were bathing in horrible waters, go to South Wales, and then you've got the kind of all the toxics coming in as well from British Steel and BP Bagland chemical plant, and the documentary was following us. Our membership was climbing quite rapidly at that point.
And you're picking up members from other parts of the country?
All over the UK, yeah. And all over the UK, people were going, you think you got it bad? Come and have a look at this. Hartlepool, my goodness, that was just stunningly hideous.
Wow.
But we, one of our members phoned us up, I think in about 91. One of the members rang up and said, look, I've bought sas.org.uk for you. And I said, what's that? Didn't know, because it didn't mean anything to us at that time. So it was completely pre-internet. It was telephones, letters, faxes. That was what was our means of communication.
Yeah. And that, because I guess, so within that context, so you talked about, like, I guess you could call it a stunt element, or like, from the, like, for example, the gas masks, and so you sort of, I guess you have to sort of be quite creative in those at that time, right? To get the attention. Was that an obvious thing immediately for you as you sort of saw that as a sort of an approach for you guys?
Yeah. We knew that the way that in a way a picture tells 1,000 words. So that use of imagery worked very well, and the kind of slightly punky underdog, lack of respect for the establishment. I mean, I don't have, I respect nature. I respect people who take nature into account, and I respect people who, in the establishment, who rule and act on behalf of the environment and people. I don't have any much respect for the establishment per se. It should be representing us. So all underneath all of that, those were these kind of values that were driving us and causing us to go. So when one of the early things was we were told that Portsdown passed the Bathing Water Directive. Well, actually it complied with the minimum standards of it, but we knew it was full of shit. Yeah. So we said, well, yeah, and it was there, lumps of human feces and panty liners and condoms getting stuck in our hair, and so that was happening. So that kind of made you go, well, why would I believe this then?
Yeah, because there's some pretty serious infections that were going on as well, right? And,
I mean, you're gonna hepatitis A, extreme diarrhea and vomiting, to the worst case, and it couldn't be concluded, but. In 1999, I was called to go and give evidence at the coroner's inquest into the death of, an 8-year-old child. And they didn't conclude that it was, but it was concluded that it was a possible route of infection. Right. So, and through that time, through the 90s, they sucked our blood. They took mouth swabs from us as surfers, and, we're 3 times more likely to contract hepatitis A than the general public. There was this certain bug called the astrovirus, and again, it was far more prevalent in surfers and recreational water users than the general population. And we would always work with these people, so they would, literally come and stick needles in us and mouth swab us and test what what were we showing as a community.
And how are you? So I guess you're up and running, membership's growing, you're discovering that this is obviously a problem all around the UK. So you're building the network on the ground. When did you start? How did you, or did you, start deciding on strategies or policies, or how did that? Because when you look at SAS from afar, you see it. At least I see it. And I think from early on you sort of see it, but it definitely is there. It continues today, is having amazing kind of mobilising potential on the ground, but also like a very, very smart sort of razor sharp focus on the establishment and what the asks are and what the policy shifts should be. And, so it's really sort of, it's very, very kind of smart organisation. And I think that feels like that was always your sort of approach. But when did you start being intentional about that?
Early on. Yeah, we kind of knew that there's no point whinging. It's easy to whinge. You've got to come up with solutions. And from very early, within the first 6 months, we wanted to see a complete cessation of the discharge of untreated sewage to sea. We wanted to see both the liquid and the solid element of it used as a resource rather than a waste. We wanted to see the greatest environmental bang per pound of customers' money spent, and we wanted a complete cessation of the discharge of toxic waste to sea. And those were 4 things that definitely within the first year we had set down. Those were and we went and looked, high and low for solutions, because we knew we couldn't just whinge. And one of the other things that happened was, as we started raising our profile, and I think this is a general thing that can happen outside of just oceans and surfing or whatever, is that if you've got a problem, put your hand up, let people know, because 2 things happen. One, someone else will go, well, I thought it was just me, and you get the shared community, and that creates more power. But also other people will come and help you. So, we had scientists, contacting us with, the results of health studies, etc., within 6 months, a year of forming. They were approaching us and saying, we like what you're doing here. Have a look at this scientific paper. Have a look at this engineering concept. And then in, I guess, 92, 3, there was this thing called, so the water companies wanted to build long sea outfalls, which basically meant dump the sewage further out to sea, which would mean that the indicator organisms that made you pass the bathing water directive you'd pass the directive, but the water at Porthtowan was still full of shit.
Right.
So indicator organisms die off in a matter of hours in salt water. Hepatitis A can do 100 days. So an absence of the indicator organisms doesn't mean an absence of harmful pathogens. Right. So we established that, and then so we didn't want long sea outfalls because they would treat the indicators but not the risk. And they were bloody expensive, big engineering projects, and very much kind of a male-dominated engineering industry at the time. Big pumps, big pipes, big dicks. And it was very much that way.
Yeah.
This was when you went to a conference. We would go to conferences, and they would absolutely hate us being there. But it was that still. People would be drinking a lot and falling asleep after lunch at these conferences. It was very, very male macho industry. That was what it was. And we eventually found out that on the island of Jersey, they'd looked at building a long sea outfall, cost £11 million, or putting in this thing called UV disinfection, ultraviolet light, on the end of secondary treatment. So they had primary and secondary already, and they would decision UV, £2 million, long sea outfall 11. They put in UV disinfection, and the bacterial count in their outfall pipe was 50 times cleaner than the standard that was meant to be okay at our beach. So I gave evidence to a Houses of Parliament Select Committee. I'd written some evidence, was called to London, went and sat in front of a Select Committee, put my suit and tie on, because, again, if you're going to go and talk to these people, you may as well, don't let a difference in dress code
mean where they're at.
Mean whether or not they take you seriously. Yeah. And they quizzed me over this, and I said, well, based on that bacterial count, I'd feel 50 times safer sticking my head up Jersey's outfall pipe. And the island of Jersey heard about that and said, that sounds good for our marketing. So off we went, and I stuck my head up their outfall pipe.
What was that like?
Yeah, lovely. I mean, it looked, tasted, and smelt cleaner than Porthtowan and the other beaches around the UK that were meant to be clean. Yeah. So, and it was cheaper. It was £9 million cheaper than building a long sea outfall. And shortly after that, by this time, certain water companies would be, even though we'd be demonstrating against them, they would always want to. Some of them. So Welsh Water, Dŵr Cymru Welsh Water, would always want to meet us. We'd nail them in the morning with a Prescal, gas mask, wetsuits, 10-foot inflatable poo, and get lots of media. They'd have to respond. But, hats off to them. They'd always then say, come and have lunch. And we'd sit and have quite an awkward lunch with them. But they looked at this UV disinfection, and they ended up, we got a fax arrive, and it's 2-page fax chugged through the machine, and we read it several times. And this was them committing to a full UV treatment policy for all of their coastal and estuarine discharges, no more long sea outfalls. And there was no catch.
Right.
And they even invited us to go and open their first full UV works. We cut the ribbon. It's Surfers Against Sewage's name on that brass plaque up there in Criccieth in North Wales.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So when did the inflatable turds happen then? Whose idea was that?
Yeah, probably guilty. That's probably 92, 3. Yeah, it's very good. And again, like no internet, so you just had to kind of like look through the yellow pages,
Yeah, right.
phone up directory inquiries for an inflatables company, and then I can remember ringing up and this woman answered the phone, and I said I want an inflatable turd, and you could tell that she'd gone off into the factory, because by the time someone came to the phone to talk to me about manufacturing one of these, they were all giggling and everything. But yeah, I think best 300 quid we ever spent, really, probably. Yeah,
because they got a lot of
yeah,
media interest, didn't they?
Yeah, and the beauty of it is that you can put that in the back of a car.
Yeah,
you turn up with your SAS car and logoed up, and 3 surfers and local surfers as well, and you connect the pump to the car battery, and next thing you got a full demo. Yeah,
it's so interesting now. I think for folks that are younger folks now who growing up with all these tools and technologies online, it's just fascinating to think about those kind of constraints that you were working with, but actually almost in many ways it's just interesting how effective they became, but that constraint I guess forced you to be more creative.
Yeah, in its way. I mean, it's yeah. You've got an opportunity, so and you need to be again. We never did mass demos. Mass demos are really hard to communicate, to get everybody there, because even if you say we're going to get 10,000 people marching, you won't get 10,000. Maybe you'll get 1,000, and it's hard to convey the numbers there. But the photo opportunity of an inflatable poo and gas mask surfers, we once did a demo in Scarborough, and we did exactly that photo shoot, and we looked at the front page of the Scarborough local newspaper on the Saturday morning. We hadn't got anything, and I went to pick the Guardian up because I usually buy that, and we were front page on that. We were the front photo on the Guardian.
You hadn't made the Scarborough Evening News.
No.
Just made the front page of the Guardian.
Yeah. We went, whoa, that's all right.
I'll take that one.
Yeah, exactly. But and that's the power of that, the power of imagery.
Did you find, because I'm interested in, I guess, also like today where activism and citizen participation is going, but just going back to that first 10 years for you, did you find did you ever have any fear around what you were doing? Did you always feel, I mean, it's interesting what holds people back, or what pushes people forward into sort of to really become active around things that we care about? And what were there any instances where you were like, well, we're pushing this one a bit too far, or is there just anything you can share around?
Again, like hats off, and I would give forever credit to Ange. So this guy Ange, he was the chairman through most of the early years, and between us, we would, if one of us would have an idea, we'd double it, treble it, quad, and then we'd go, oh, that's slightly too far, and we'd bring it back down. But there was always that, we knew we were taking on the combined force of 10 privatised water companies, the Department of the Environment, the National Rivers Authority, now the Environment Agency. That's who you were taking on. So it was almost the more that gave you the force. And it was scary.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You would kind of go, my God, we don't have a clue what we're doing, really.
Yeah.
But you had this sense of kind of righteous outrage. And you knew people wanted you to succeed, and they were paying their membership, and that was your job. And it was a kind of privilege to do it. Although I guess in a way you never thought about it as a privilege. It was just the job to go and do.
Yeah.
And we'd always thought that, that first year, we probably never thought that we would be going a year later. We thought we'd do a little bit of publicity that first summer, and that would be that. So every year and every day that you were there was a bonus.
Yeah.
And therefore go hard.
Yeah. And did you feel, were there any particular situations, or did you, because I guess that's the thing, your I guess the enemy was these organisations, was these, did you have any instances where you really did feel that pressure from, was there any particular times where you really did feel the heat off these organisations? How did they treat you?
Oh yeah, like off the record, you'd do some media takes, with, would be filmed by television, and you'd have the chief exec or MD of a company with you, and off camera they'd be pretty brutal. They didn't want us to exist, really. They absolutely didn't want us to exist.
Yeah.
And I would say most of them were pretty honourable, but there were a few cases where, people, I would have said they stepped beyond their professional line. And I guess that was just partly their problem. But that's, we had a job to do. We weren't going to back down just because it upset them. That wasn't part of the remit at all. And, I mean, there were some absolute scary ones. Like I got called to go and give evidence to the Monopolies and Mergers Commission once. And, I knew I was up against it when in the waiting room, there's 10 copies of the Financial Times, 28 coffee cups, and you walk in there and there's the 11 members of the Monopolies and Mergers Commission, and then there's all their advisors and the other side. So there's probably 50 people stacked up on the other side of the room, and on our side of the room there was one glass of water and one name tag. But respect to them, they, the opening words from the chairman was, we understand this must be incredibly intimidating. Take your time. You've got every right to be here. Speak your truth.
Yeah. And politically, how did the sort of because there, you sense today that there's with the select committees in Parliament. How did that relationship politically evolve then between Surfers Against Sewage?
We very quickly, so within, we did our first so we formed officially in May 1990. We demoed Parliament and went to the Houses of Parliament in March 91. So within 10 months of forming, and we basically were down the pub going, we got to do something. We should just go to the Houses of Parliament. Yeah, that sounds like a. So you go in Monday morning, ring up the Houses of Parliament, say, how do we do this? And you phone up, and the Sergeant at Arms says, up you come up, meet me, and within 6 weeks you can come and demo Parliament. And you'll probably want to book a meeting room because, okay, we will. And can
we bring an inflatable turd with us?
Yeah, they didn't let us do that. No, we didn't have that at the time. Yeah. But he said that you can bring your surfboards and you can write whatever you want on your surfboards. So a coach came from Cornwall, and then other members came from around the UK to lobby their MPs. We booked a meeting room, and again we had this Channel 4 documentary following us. We got Sky News. We were on the sofas on Sky, Capital FM. And the day we arrived, the government announced a £2 million spend on research into the health effects of surfing and swimming in sewage-contaminated seawater. Wow. So the very act of stepping forward triggered that £2 million spend. They wanted to be able to say, yes, we take this very seriously, and here you go. And we, in the debating room, we had the Shadow Environment spokesman, the Lib Dem Environment spokesman, and the Minister, David Trippier, turned up because he had to. So we'd forced that hand.
Amazing. And so that first decade, because obviously, you started as Surfers Against Sewage, that was the focus, was sewage and then other toxins coming in. But how did that 10 years develop? Can you give us a sense of how it all unfolded and what was the impacts that you made in that 10 years? Okay, so, the massive thing that was achieved is so... We've been driving this, high as hard as we could up the political agenda with our members. We'd lobbied Europe. We'd been to the European Parliament, briefed them. We'd found the solutions. We used legal cases. We won, with 2 women. We did a judicial review of a council. So, and one at the Royal Courts of Justice, and we had our science. So we were using all these different tools. We were buying shares in their companies. We were affecting share price.
And we were a hot topic. Sewage contamination of bathing waters was a big issue in the 97 election. Not the overarching one, but environmentally it was one of the top issues. Because climate change was bubbling, but it wasn't out where it is now.
Yeah.
And that shift, that change from Conservative to Labour in the 97 election, massive landslide. Lots of the seats that went from Tory to Labour were in coastal constituencies. And they wanted a quick win. I'd been at a press call back in the December of 96 with Michael Meacher. And in 97, he then became the Secretary of State for the Environment. And I got a phone call in September. They came to power in May. September, I got an invitation, 24 hours notice to go to be a special advisor to the Secretary of State. Walked into a meeting room, 3 senior guys from the Environment Agency, 3 senior civil servants from the Department of the Environment, Mr. Meacher, another couple of advisors, and myself. And I had free rein to ask any question I wanted. And we knew what we needed was UV disinfection. And we knew it was cheaper. And we basically had that argument within that room. And I walked out of there 2 hours later, punching the air. And 6 weeks later, Labour ruled that all sewage discharges must receive at least secondary treatment with UV disinfection for about 2/3 of that population. But we were using EU legislation as well. That's the other thing. We were just forcing the UK government to comply in true spirit with the legislation on time. So from that point of, and it took until the end of the year 2005 for all those treatment plants to be built, and most of the big ones were done by the end of 2000. So that was done, and that triggered about a £5 billion spend on the clean-up of the UK coastline.
Amazing.
Yeah. That wasn't all of us.
Sure.
But we played a significant role in that.
Yeah. You created a lot of noise around the issue.
And we were pushing the solutions. It's that. We were pushing the solutions and the need and the public awareness and the public demand. I mean, even down we're at this conference this workshop in Dublin now, and I was saying to someone earlier, the power of the media. One of our members rang up at one point and said, "Look, I'm a scriptwriter for BBC Casualty. Let's do something." And they wrote, this was when Casualty used to have 14 million viewers on a Saturday night. And they did a program called Waving But Not Drowning. And it was our story. They couldn't say Surfers Against Sewage, but they spent £2,000 on our sweatshirts and T-shirts. So we were right through that program.
Amazing.
And I think there's a really powerful way there of connecting and creating some of those changes by normalising it. You don't just have to watch a program where you're concerned about environmental activism to get the message. You can put that message across in a lot of different ways.
And so your personal journey was a decade, right?
Yeah.
And so then tell me about stepping away from an organisation like that, and now, because I think it'd be good just to understand your relationship now, and because it's quite amazing to have been a part of something, but also to step away. And I don't know what your relationship is now, but I'd just be curious because I think the success now, 30 years next year. I mean, it's a phenomenal story, and and I think it's today that kind of lifespan that started off, like you say, in such a sort of brilliant kind of experimental way. Tell me about your relationship and moving on from that.
So when we got that commitment to do everything, that was 85% of what we set out to do. And I think the utopian view would have been everything would have been UV disinfected, and so we'd achieved that. And I'd always said that part of my job remit was to put myself out of a job as quickly as I could. So I kind of had talked myself into that, if you see it.
Yeah.
And I was tired.
Yeah, I bet.
It was, early days of SAS, like the first 4 years of SAS, I was living in a caravan, and, that's we were paying minimum wages and that kind of stuff, and it was hard work, and so I was tired, and I kind of I felt I'd achieved that, so I felt I'd done my time, and I passed the baton on. Now, it's important to stress they do an amazing job. I had lunch with Hugo on Friday, and they're doing an amazing job. And they're still burning with that energy, and they're still that committed, and they're still, and they still got that spirit and that, little bit of edginess and, edginess whilst being absolutely, like you said, edge, but incredibly focused on what you're wanting to do. Really efficient with the resources that you've got. You're taking on a massive, great industry. They're doing amazing work now with plastics. I mean, there's a huge task, but again, focus. Be really efficient.
It's super interesting though, because I think that's to have that spirit and to have those types, like to have that edge, that focus, to keep that. That's quite a rare thing I've seen, particularly in the environmental space, to keep that that energy. What's the secret to that thing? Why has SAS managed to keep that alive?
I think because some of it, I reckon, is because we're living in it.
Yeah.
So, as I said, I met Hugo Friday at 1:00. He'd been for a surf before work. I've been for a surf in the middle of the morning because I was a bit slack on work. Yeah. But, we'd both been in the water, so you're seeing it firsthand, and that drives back. This isn't a theoretical thing,
right,
that you're campaigning about, that you're being an activist about. You're seeing it.
Yeah, it's visceral. It's around you.
Yeah, around you all the time, and that gives you, the people legislating it. It's not like that. They don't see that. One of the best things that could happen to Parliament is that all of those, guys and girls in the houses who are meant to be representing us, if they all worked for 2 weeks a year in their summer recess in a real job, whoa, we would see a change in the way that the country was run. But because they're legislating and ruling on stuff that they think theoretically they understand. It's like, the Secretary of State for Health. When did he ever work a shift in A&E?
On the front line.
Never.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
And you can't, that's you can't rule a country and legislate without that genuine experience.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I was chatting to quite recently, we were talking about again, how so much of our power is, policies and meetings of leaders and everything. It's all done in very removed environments, rooms that are kind of out of the way of anything. We said before, if you put a bunch of world leaders in a wood at night and around a fire and got them to kind of sleep out and make decisions on their relationship to how we legislate around the natural world, or like you say, you put them in the ocean for a meet, because you're the context, you realise your order in the order of things in life, right? Which I think surfers and those folks that spend plenty of time in or around the ocean are feeling and sensing all the time, right? So it's
and that's where you draw your power from. That's where you can draw your energy.
Yeah,
and your inspiration comes from that.
Yeah,
and then it goes through and out, and that's who you're acting for. That's who, that's who you represent. You represent the oceans and everybody who uses it.
Yeah. So thinking about, because I was interested, I've been chatting a little bit over the last couple of days, but just about the youth climate strikes on Friday that have just happened, and for me that was such an interesting, not only because my son went on it, but it just felt like there's some energy like on the ground again in a very sort of positive way, I'd say. But you've been at the from 1990 at that kind of grassroots creative activism kind of. What's your sense now when you look around 30 years later and of what's happening? Are you hopeful for for change? What do you see when you kind of look around the UK now and beyond? How do you feel about
some things depress me immensely, although I tend not to get depressed immensely. But they worry me, they concern me. But I am optimistic. I think we can do this. We absolutely have the ability and the know-how and the resource to solve all of these problems. And it's just about prioritising that. I do think and hope that everybody votes. That's where the power shift can come. Because at the moment, I look back in 1962, as many people aged between 18 and 25 voted as over 65s voted. You look at the last general election, and it was massively skewed. There had been a change in the last one. There were more young people voted, but they hold the power. So this lot doing this now, it may be a bit grim at the moment, but I reckon over the next 2 or 3 elections, we will see a shift. Now, that does require a lot of good communication. It requires some leaders coming through, but absolutely hold these people to task. They represent us. Never, ever let them dictate to us. It's like really important. I always have on my surfboard, I spray. Tom Robinson Band had an album called Power in the Darkness back in the mid-70s, and on it, inside it, so there's the Fist of Solidarity on the front cover, and inside was a stencil, and it said "Do not spray on public property," which absolutely was what you were meant to do. But I always have that fist, and I put it on my surfboards, and MAD, make a difference, because we can, and we have. Not only do we have the right to make a difference, but I think we also have a responsibility. We're lucky. You and I, we've tonight we've got a roof over our head. We're going to go and eat a lovely meal in a minute. We're all warm. A lot of people on the face of the planet don't have that. We can campaign. We can be activists without getting shut up in jail, tortured, or even, killed. So therefore we absolutely have the right and the duty to do that. We're the lucky ones. Make it count. And I think if we all get that and we motivate up, we don't have to be violent about it. We can do all this. We're intelligent enough. It was brilliant seeing Greta Thunberg completely destroy Theresa May with her tweet. When Theresa May said, I think it's irresponsible. You're wasting your time. And she said, well, you've been wasting time for 30 years on climate change. If that was just brilliant. So watch out.
Yeah. And I guess that's
complacent politicians.
Yeah. Can we have like digital inflatable turds these days? Right.
I'm sure. and that's for the creatives to do.
Yeah.
We were lucky, but we used the tools that we had.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that staggers me now, I have no idea how to do all of that. I barely tweet. I can use FaceAche a bit, but I don't like it.
Yeah.
But they know what those tools are. And there'll be people amongst them. So for them, it won't be the script writer of Casualty. It'll be the equivalent of that'll crank the power up to that kind of level.
Yeah. And I guess what's interesting now is seeing, as well as sort of campaigning for policy changes, and obviously now with SAS with the focus on plastics, but actually there's also this parallel push into behaviour change by the citizen. So whether that's now with plastic-free communities, there's the kind of policy asks and the kind of shifts from infrastructure to deposit returns to all that kind of stuff we're asking industry and politics to do. But also now there's this shift into mobilising supporters to actually start to shift behaviours of friends and family and citizens and communities. And that's an interesting shift as well, because it's quite a different task.
Yeah.
To get those kind of changes happening. But it's been interesting to see that that's popping up in many ways. It's like, you're going inland, you're seeing these communities popping up all over the place around the country, and
Yeah,
so it's such an interesting time.
And that's using the tools that are available now to incredible power.
Yeah.
I think SAS has its big beach clean, or big spring clean coming up. And there'll be, an amazing number of people out there on beaches right around the UK and communities all going. And that was...
And that's going rivers as well now.
And that wasn't possible before. It was, really, really hard to... It just wasn't possible. So to activate and motivate and facilitate that kind of multi-thousands, tens of thousands of people to go out and act in that way. And that is a strong message. And the politicians, they can see that happening. So can all the consumers and, the buying power and, it can change brands.
Yeah, right. Yeah, interesting times. Just from your sense now, where are you? What's your plans now? Where are you? Other things that you're interested in doing, or what are you? Where can people track down your?
So I operate. It's largely just me, but a little organisation called A Grain of Sand. Small, irritating, but out comes the odd pearl. That's what I like to do, and I try and work with organisations that want to try and make a difference, and whether that be on a business, and I do a one-day workshop with them about their sustainability thinking and embedding that. I work with The Wave in Bristol, and we're embedding sustainable thinking in that, all the decisions that we make.
Yeah, just tell us about it, because there'll be people that won't know that project. Give us a...
So The Wave in Bristol is an artificial surfing wave on a man-made lake, and it's amazing technology. A wave every 10 seconds. And obviously, we're going to be running on renewable energy. Some wave pools around the world aren't going to be doing that. And I think that would be fundamentally wrong. But we're also going to be using it as a way of encouraging people out into the natural environment and physical recreation for, mental and physical well-being and, lovely landscapes and things like that. I work with a staff-owned community interest dental company that, takes all of its profits and puts them back into, good social projects. A deep geothermal energy project in Cornwall, United Downs Deep Geothermal. So we're drilling 2 holes, one 2.5 kilometres, one deep, and the other one 4.5 kilometres deep, and extracting natural energy from the planet. And that's a test project. Wow. So helping them with communications. And then I do, bits of public speaking, around the UK and the odd bit of further afield, inspiring people to try and believe that they can make a difference. That's my, I'm really lucky to have had that experience, that I know that, a bunch of surfers with no campaign experience at all and no knowledge of anything can make a big difference. And if we can, then just think what everybody can do. Yeah. And that's my kind of key message, I think, is believe you can.
Yeah, I love that. That obviously with the Spaceship Earth and Buckminster Fuller and the inspiration for this podcast, but and that saying, there are no passengers on Spaceship Earth, we're all crew. What does that mean to you, that whole idea? That completely sings. That's like music to my ears, because what I was saying earlier about we're the lucky ones. I mean, there are some passengers, there are some people who it's tough to be anything other than the passenger just hanging on by, your fingernails. So for the passengers who are in the first class or second class department, we should really act, and we have to. It is our responsibility. Why should someone else do something? It's not, we're all part of this. So absolutely we should do that. And I love the concept of it being, Spaceship Earth. We are. That's what we are. We're just, insignificant in time and the universe from afar. And we've got this amazing planet. We're so, so lucky. So, it's our responsibility. We need to make it count. Chris, thanks so much for the chat. It's been brilliant to hear a bit of the story and a sense of your journey you've been on. Really appreciate it. And I'll put links to your work and contacts in the show notes so anyone can follow up and and reach out. But thanks very much for joining me.
A real pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Chris Hines. Do check out the work of Surfers Against Sewage if you're not aware of what they're up to. They're an amazing organisation, absolutely pumping it at the moment. So check them out in the show notes. If you're interested in this podcast, if you like what you're hearing, please do share it. Give it a rating if you like on Apple, or it's on Spotify now. We're into the Spotify zone, or SoundCloud. Ratings, reviews, anything. It's all good because it just surfaces the podcast. Surfaces. It just it helps other people find it. So if you like what you're hearing, please do, give it some love, or give it a rant if you don't like it. That's all right as well. Drop me a line if you want to share anything. Get in touch. It's dan@thespaceship.earth, and you'll find all the podcasts at thespaceship.earth online now. So thanks for listening. Remember, folks, there are no passengers on Spaceship Earth. We are all crew. Until next time. Peace and